Hey everybody, it's Zimtex here. In today's video, I'm going to be making this baby bass swim bait. So stick around, we're going to get started on it right now. So I've had it in mind to make a new and better swim bait. I could remake this bluegill, which I love, because it's the closest to what I want, but it wouldn't necessarily be the most interesting video for y'all to watch. Instead, I've wanted to make a smaller version of this bass lure that I made. This is a 7-inch bass. I made it last year, I think. And I've come up with enough improvements, I believe, to make it more interesting. You can see here that I've redrawn my original design down to a 5-inch bait. But something that I would like to improve upon this bass lure is to reduce the size of this joint. You can see that it has a huge amount of space here, which I don't really like. And while it doesn't really seem to affect the action, a narrow joint like this one looks a lot better to me. When I made this bluegill, you can see I narrowed down that joint quite a bit using a pinned joint, but it was more time consuming and difficult to get right. And I also had a lot of fit and finish issues towards the end. After a lot of contemplation, I've come up with a better hinge system that sort of combines the ease of the double twist wire that I used to make this lure and the slimmer profile of the bluegill lure. This will be a 3-piece bait with joints here and here. I'm going to be making my cut at 45 degrees. I do want to have a lip to give this lure a lot of action. And the angle I'm going to go with for this lip is 70 degrees because I'm planning on a slow-ish sink, so I don't want it to dive too much. One of my favorite things about this bluegill lure are the flexible resin fins, which allow me to make a thinner fin that can be painted to match the rest of the lure. And so you can see that's what I intend to do here as well. Lastly, I'm going to have 2 hooks, one here and one here. I'm generally keeping those at third points along the lure to increase my hookup ratio. And I also want to keep the hooks away from one another so that they don't get tangled up. Okay, I want to mark the top profile, and to do that I'm going to use this marking gauge that I've got to mark the center line. I've got it linked in the description if you're interested. It's a pretty handy tool because it allows me to put a mark all the way down the middle. And then I've taken my top profile and I've cut it in half. And the reason I did that is so that I can make sure that I get a good symmetrical transfer here. exact same thing. While we're at this stage, the other thing I want to mark is my cut lines. Okay, and then I'm going to use this extra piece to kind of hold my blade still. Now it's important to not go all the way to the center line. This is what you should be left with at this stage. You can see I've got my cuts that do not go all the way to the middle. And that'll allow us to move on to the next step, which is cutting out this top profile. Okay, so I'm using a kind of a narrow line here at the top and the bottom, but then I'm gonna change my grip and I'm gonna widen that on the sides. And what that'll do is that'll give me a little bit more rounded profile when I get to the sanding part. I'm ready to transfer my carving pattern onto my piece of wood. And for those of you unfamiliar with the technique I use, I've traced in pencil on the other side the same gill pattern. That way when I put it on this side and I trace it, it'll transfer that mark onto the other side. After I carve out my gills, you're going to see me use this little micro motor, little rotary tool. You don't necessarily have to have one of these. You can get the exact same job done with little bits of sandpaper. But what this does is it allows you to go a little bit faster and get into some of those tight places a little bit easier. But I've made plenty of these without any kind of rotary tool at all. It's not necessary, it's just kind of a handy little convenience. You could also use a Dremel. This one's a little bit spendy because it's portable. It's a battery powered deal, and so if I'm outside or traveling or whatever, it's really convenient to have this portable unit. But like I said, at the end of the day, you can get the same job done with a little piece of sandpaper. As you can see, I've re-penciled the little lines on there from my template, and these are just really shallow grooves. I'm just gonna trace the line, and I'm gonna do a parallel tiny groove right next to it and slightly in. Just a miniature version of the big cut I made for the gills. Okay. Same thing there. So I can get a shadow line across it. You can kind of see. There you go. And then for the eyes, I've got my 1/4 inch Forstner bit on there. One of the things I like about this rotary tool is that it's really quick and easy to switch out bits. Just like that. I've decided what I'm going to do is cast these fins out of resin. However, to do that, I need to carve a master for them first. And I'm going to use a little scrap piece of this 1/8 inch thick basswood that I've got left over. Just like before, I've put my pencil marks on the back side of this so that I can transfer them onto the wood. I'm also going to extend that about 1/8 of an inch down into the wood, into the body, and that'll be how I attach it. So let's go ahead and just do that. Just take a quick peek here at what we're going to do. So we've got our top fin, like so. Got our tail fin. That's kind of sort of what we're going for right there. My little file pack, I'm going to get this one that's rounded here. Okay, that's the basic idea. I'm going to work on it a little bit more. But then on the opposite side, I'm going to alternate. I'm going to do 2 grooves on that side. That gives it kind of a wavy aesthetic to it. All we're doing here is giving some dimension to our fin, because I could just do the radial lines like that and just do, but it would look, I think, a little bit flat and 2D and not all that great. Honestly, this isn't a whole lot of extra work, but I think it gives it a lot more dimension. Now we can come in and draw those little rays. I want to get started on these fin details. I've got my wood burner here with this tip on it. Great thing about using a wood burner for this is I'm able to get a lot more lines in there very quickly. Basically just want these fins to fit between those 2 joints there. So I'll put those on the center line and then trace this. There's some variation on these tails, I guess, or there could be in future models and stuff. So that's all right. These fins you'll be able to shape them to the particular lure that you're working on, but I'd rather have a little bit of extra to work with just in case. That got a little bit narrower than I had originally anticipated. Okay, and then here on the bottom, we're going to want that fin to be just forward of that joint. Probably going to need to work on my depth, but I'll just keep routing it down and until I get to my proper depth, and then I can seat that fin properly. Getting ready to make a mold of our fins here for casting, and I'm going to approach this a little bit differently. I don't want to do a two-sided mold. I want this to be like a top pour type mold, an open mold. And so we're gonna set up a jig to be able to do that. And I'm gonna use one of my old mold boxes that I've used before. I'm gonna kind of slim it down probably for this purpose, hopefully. But you'll kind of see where I'm going once we get going here. But let's use a little bit of hot glue. Get a little bit of my modeling clay here. Okay, that's still kind of rough, but this is kind of close enough to illustrate what I'm trying to do here. So I've got my clay and I'm gonna mound it up on the sides like that. And what that'll do is when I make my mold, that'll be sort of a funnel shape that'll funnel my resin. So we'll kind of flip it over to show you what we're gonna do. So when we pour in the top, all that resin will flow down into the fin areas, and it'll just sort of be an open top deal. And then when I pull all that out, I should wind up with something that looks like this, to where I can cut out the pieces. It will require a little bit of cutting, and that's kind of the sacrifice, but I think to be able to get a fin set in a single pour is going to be pretty handy. And I've created these V's right here like this, because obviously if I make a mold, I need to pull that all out of the silicone, and I won't be able to do that if there's this shape here. So these will be cast as part of the deal, and then I'll just cut them off. After a little bit of cleaning up and whatnot, this is what I've got here. Let's secure our box here. Some glue on here. I'm just going to glue that down to my block of wood. I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to seal that with my clay so that my silicone doesn't leak out. For my silicone, I'm using this Let's resin. Let's see, here's the box. I'm using this kit. It's linked in the description if you're interested in using it. I've had pretty good results with it. But anyway, I'm just finishing this off from another project I had, so I'm just going to use all of this. Otherwise, you'd want to measure it really carefully and keep it the same by weight. Okay, one more thing I want to show you real quick before I pour this is I cut a shim board in here like a filler piece, and I've got another one here because I don't know if I've got enough silicone, so I'm just going to reduce the size of my area there. I'm going to pour this bad boy in there. And we're going to let that set overnight. It says 12 to 24 hours for it to cure. We need to come up with a lip design for this. Let's measure that real quick. I don't remember how long I was thinking on that, including the embedment. An inch, pretty much an inch. So three-quarters of an inch. Okay, and then we want that to flare out 1.25 inches. Let's take a look at what that looks like. And then y'all know me, I kind of like a coffin shaped bill. I feel like it's a good balance between a square bill and a rounded one. So let's knock those corners off about 1/4 inch. I feel like that's gonna be pretty good. Really the point of this is not really to dive, but to create some motion on the front. That's really the point of this particular lip. Got that to fit pretty nicely. Now we're going to take some pretty coarse sandpaper and we're just going to kind of rough up this area right where the lure is to give us a little bit better mechanical bond when we go to epoxy this in. All right, I know this is going to surprise the heck out of y'all, but we're using this .041 stainless steel aircraft lock wire, linked in the description below, same as I use on just about everything. And I need to make a lot of hardware here. I'm going to cut some 4-inch pieces here. That ought to be plenty for us. Let's just do sort of a quick count of what we're going to need. I'm going to need an attachment point, 2 hook points, and then the hinges. I'll need 2 hinges, 2 hinges, but each of those hinges requires 2 wires. So I'll need 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11 wires. Once I've got them cut, I fold them in half. I give this end a little twist here so it stays together. I'm going to chuck that up into my drill. The key to getting a nice tight loop at the end is to pinch this down a little bit. About like that. Okay? I'm going to put my little screwdriver in there. Okay, now that's a single loop, obviously. But to make a hinge, I'm going to take another piece of wire here and run it through. I'm going to twist that end again. And now we have a nice hinge. It's been over 24 hours, and so our fin mold should be done. Kind of hard to tell from here, but it looks pretty good. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to trim off some of this flashing and get it kind of cleaned out. And then we'll pour a batch of it and see what it does. Ready to cast my fins, but step one is to figure out what my volume is. So I've got a little bit of water here. It's at 3/4 of a fluid ounce. So let's just pour some in there. It's really only 1/8 of an ounce to fill that, which is not a lot. Here's a quick breakdown of my mixture here. I need 1/8 of an ounce of resin, which is equal to 3.5 grams, okay? And I'm going to divide that into the two parts, part A and part B, okay? So I need 1 3/4 grams of each. And then as far as my micro balloons, I'm gonna do about 10% of that. And so I'm gonna take my 3.5 grams times 10% is 0.35. Now the instructions here, and I missed this the first time I used this stuff, is it's saying to mix half the total of the amount into part A and then the other half into part B and stir them thoroughly individually and then mix them together. So we're going to do that this time. And so if I divide my 0.35 into two parts, that's how much we need to add to A and that's how much we need to add to B. That's going to give me more than 3.5 ounces. And the reason I'm doing it that way is that gives me a margin of safety. That way I'm sure to have enough resin to make my fins. I don't want to fall short, so I'd rather have a little bit extra in there. So before I mix all this and pour it, I thought I might go over the stuff I'm using here. I'm of course using this silicone mold release. It's the same I used when I was making my silicone mold. I'm also going to use it again here for releasing my resin from the mold. And I went on ahead and sprayed this so that it can be drying and all that stuff. My resin this is from Alumilite, actually. Alumilite makes this. It's amazing casting resin. It's 2-part, and everything comes out white. And I've used this before in some of my other videos. And then for my microspheres, I've got Alumilite here as well. All this stuff is linked in the description below if you're interested in using it. I think it works pretty well. And I have gone on ahead and mixed my microspheres into part A and to part B, half and half, as per the instructions. And I was really careful to use separate stirring sticks as well, so that I don't inadvertently start a reaction there. One thing about this stuff is that it sets up incredibly fast. You really don't have a whole lot of time to work with it. 2 minutes is what it says. So we're gonna have to giddy up on this. All right, that's good. I'm just gonna pour it in there while it's still nice and liquid. That's why I molded that channel into that, so that it would pour in there a lot easier. Let's try and get all of our bubbles out. All right, we should be good to demold here. Let's see what we got. Yep. Yeah, it's gonna need a little bit of cleanup, but I think that's pretty decent, especially for a first mold. Not too bad. All I gotta do is cut these out and then they're ready to go. And as far as this tail goes, I might just use a little super glue and baking soda to build that back up and patch it I think that's what I'll do. See, I've got a little bit of a gap around that. We are going to fill it with some baking soda here. Just going to kind of pile it a little bit there and then tap. And then smooth it off with my finger. See? And then we'll put a drop super glue on there and it is filled. Nice and neat. To deal with these little holes we got here, what I'm going to attempt is to fill it with this super glue and baking soda. Let it mound up like that, and then I'll put a drop on it. There we go. And then we can sand it down and get it rounded a little bit better. I'm gonna mark all my hinges to a 1/2 inch embedment depth. Also, I've been working on carving this out, and the idea is I want my loop to fit in there nicely like so. Alright, so for the front belly hook, I'm going to need to kind of angle that to avoid this bottom hinge. And then for the attachment point here on the front, I've got a 1-inch piece, and we're going to go up like that to avoid the lip slot there. Now let's get a dry fit here and see what we got. There we go. I can't mess with it too much because those will just pull out, but it's pretty good range of motion. The next step for me is going to be to seal the wood, and I'm going to do that, of course, with my Instacure here. I'm just going to coat the whole thing, waterproof it really good. And then I'm going to go ahead and epoxy in the lip slot and probably these 3 attachment points. I do not want to epoxy in my hinges yet. That's going to be very, very last after I've painted everything. ready to ballast this guy, and I'm going to show you what I've done here is I've hot glued in these joints here in the middle, and the reason I've done that is I just need a temporary hold. I'm going to want to take it apart when I paint it, but for now I kind of need a temporary hold. I like to use hot glue because I can remove it without damaging anything that I've done. To ballast this, I'm going to use the same technique that I always use, and for those of you who don't know, real fast I'll just explain. I've made these little lead weights, different sizes. I just take a block of wood and I use my Forstner bits and I drill at different depths and just pour some lead in there, and it gives me these little rounds that I can use for ballasting purposes. And what I like to do is I like to hot glue them at different locations on the bottom, and then I can test them real quick and see how it looks. For this one, I think I'm going to need a pretty good weight here up on the front. I'm going to double stack some. Same thing in the middle piece. It's a lot of wood, so I feel like I'm going to need quite a bit of weight in the belly. And then the tail, I don't have a whole lot of space, but I'm going to put what I can in there. Then I've got some hooks with rings already on them. I'm just going to hang those on there to get it as accurate as possible. Ooh, that's pretty fast fall. It's probably too fast for what I'm wanting to do, but I'm also looking very carefully to see how each piece is balanced. And since it's going straight up and down, I think the distribution is great. It's just a little too much weight. I don't want it to sink that fast. I popped the little one off of that one and that one. Let's see what we got now. It's probably too much. Ooh, look at that. Look how slow that is, man. Huh. That's slow enough. Now you have to keep in mind, when you put foil and clear coat on it, that's going to add a little bit more weight, so it will sink a little bit faster than that. But it also looks to me like the head section's just a little bit light because the head's up slightly. So we'll keep that in mind when we're drilling out for adding the lead in there. But I think we're pretty close. I do want it to sink faster than that, but I know that I will get more sink when I finish this thing, so I think we're in the ballpark. I'll start here in the tail. I'll just remove my hot glue. And see, it didn't even leave a mark, just completely remove it. I think I better do 2 1/4 inchers. I'm trying to eyeball volume here. I feel like I'm pretty close. All right, moving up to the belly, we are going to switch to the 3/8. Yeah, that'll be plenty. Need to seal that exposed wood where I drilled, so I'm just going to go back around with some of this super glue. You want to make sure that your lead is nice and cool, but all I'm doing is waterproofing that exposed wood around the edges there. That way I can put it back in the tank and make sure our weight's right. And if it's not, then now's the time to make that adjustment. All right, let's see how we did. I think we're pretty close here. Nice. What you're looking for is a nice even fall. The fish is level. You can have it sink at any rate you want. It could be really fast, it could be really, really slow. You could have it sit slightly on the top and it'd be more of a wake bait. Kind of up to you. But I like a kind of a slow fall. I like to put my baking soda in a folded piece of paper here because it gives me really, really good control when I go to put it where I want it. See, and then all we got to do is sand that smooth and we'll be ready to put a finish on it. I've disassembled all three pieces and taken out the wire so that we can begin foiling. And I'm going to use some aluminum foil tape that's used for ducks. I get it at this hardware store. I do get a lot of questions about that. Really the important thing about that is that it doesn't have any printing on it. But I'm going to cut me a couple of pieces here. Now I'm going to put my scale pattern on my pieces of foil here. And to do that, I've got some aluminum mesh that I've taped to an old calendar here. And I'm going to use that to transfer my scale pattern. I'm going to put them together like this. I'm going to try and line them up on the foil best I can. I'm going to use my thumbnail to rub that pattern in, but I'm being very careful to stay away from the head area. I don't like to have scale pattern on my gills, so I'm going to avoid that area. But otherwise, I'm just going to use my thumbnail and transfer that texture. All right, we can peel those off and you can see we get a pretty cool scale pattern on there. Let's go ahead and start with the head. And you can see, and I'm not going to press at all here, this is very, very light. You can see that line there, that's the cut line. But I'm going to go just a hair past it. And then I'm going to leave about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to taper down to the nose. Peel our foil. And I'm going to align my nose to nose, as best I can. We'll go ahead and roll this top over like that. And I need to make a cut here for my lip so that I can fold over. Like so. Where you get these little folds like this, you could just take your thumbnail and push it from the bottom of the fold out to the edge. And you can see they don't go away completely, but it's minimized. Then I'm going to use the squishy part of my thumb to kind of eke out a little more detail here. Then I'm going to use my embossing tool here that I've got with a little sphere on the end. I've got a couple of these and they have different size spheres on each end, but I'm going to use the biggest one. And I'm going to trace my gill pattern. So once I've gone over the whole thing, I'm going to move down to the next size sphere and do the same thing. And all I'm doing is I'm slowly stretching that foil and conforming it to the shape I want. If you were to go straight to the small one, it would probably puncture the foil, and you don't want to do that. Now, I've got some detail carving right here. I'm going to push really hard with my thumb to bring that up a little bit. And then what I'm going to use is the next to smallest one that I've got, and I'm going to trace those features carefully. Like so. So this is probably good enough. You could leave it like this if you wanted to. Another cool detail though that I sometimes do is some stippling. So I'll go back to that large embossing sphere and just put a lot of dots together. And it creates a cool little bumpy texture. And the last thing I need to do on the head is trim off all this excess that I've got folded over. I'm going to trim it right up to the fold. So the next section I'm going to line up like so. Edge of the segment is right there. So that's where I'm going to cut. And then because I've got the fins on the top and on the bottom, I'm not going to be able to fold my foil over as far. So I'm going to cut this a lot closer to my pencil line, about 1/8 of an inch. I'm just going to align it like so, right on that edge. Finally, we come to the tail section. Again, I'm going to align that with my edge of the joint. Then we'll trim around the tail. Before I paint, I'm going to want to make sure that I degrease this foil because I've been touching it with my hands and there's oils and stuff. So I'm going to put a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a paper towel here, and I'm just going to kind of scrub it a little bit just to make sure that it's clean. I took this picture of a small spotted bass that I caught, I think it was last year. Anyway, I'm gonna approach the paint scheme a little bit different than the last time I did a bass. And the colors that I'm thinking I'm gonna use here are, of course, white for the belly, like an opaque white, and then cover that with a pearl white. I always do that, it looks great. And then as far as the color in the body goes, I'm seeing little bits of kind of a gold. So I might use a little bit of pearlized satin gold, just a hint of that. Or if I really need to kind of, in some cases it's pretty bright, so I might hit it with just a little bit of iridescent yellow as well for that. And then I'm also picking up just a hint of green, so I'm probably going to use a little bit of this detail moss green in there, a little bit, very sparingly though. And then of course for all the spots and the markings, I'm going to use transparent black for that. But I just wanted to kind of show you what I'm going for color wise. I could do a lot of custom mixes to get this just right, but I don't really want to do that. I like to use straight out of the bottle colors wherever I can, because it's honestly a whole lot easier than trying to make a custom color. The first thing we're going to do is put some opaque white here and there, and that's going to be kind of a primer for some things and sort of a base color for others, so that we get a good color rendition. Detail moss green. So I'm perfectly willing to admit that this may be the wrong choice, but I feel like what I need to do is knock that green down with a little bit of a silver kind of color. So I'm gonna go over a little bit with some pearl silver, just to kind of try and tame that green just a little bit. Yeah, it is. It is kind of taming it. I still see the green in there, but it's covered with a little bit of that silvery color, which is getting closer to what we want. I'm going to kind of mist it with this iridescent yellow, and we'll see how that looks. Just a little bit of this pearl gold, pearl satin gold, just along kind of the top of the bag. Transparent black. It's the next day. I have removed this from the drying wheel, you can kind of see the edges of the foil there. A little bit there, a little bit there. It's pretty slight, actually. It's better than I expected. Generally speaking, I clear coat and then paint it so you don't see it at all. But that's a pretty subtle line there. So I guess if you were happy with that, you could just stop right there and be done with that particular step. However, I'm kind of a little bit of a perfectionist, so I am going to at least put a little bit of paint over that just to conceal that seam. Start with a little bit of opaque white. And we're going to mist over that a little bit with some pearl white. Then along the back, we want to go very sparingly with the transparent black. Yeah, that's going to be too black, so we'll go over it again with some gold or something to bring it back down. To knock down that black just a little bit, we're going to put a little misting of pearl satin gold. I think it also kind of ties it back to those original colors that we have below. For the eyes, I've got these red gold 6mm from Brule. I'm going to apply my decal now, and these are just water slide decals. I've got them linked in the description below. I'll also put up a video that does a little bit more detail on how I do that and the process, but basically these are the same thing that you'd use on a model car, model airplane, something like that. But I've made my own logos here that you can see. Boop. I'm just going to put it in the water for a couple of seconds. I'm going to dab it both sides, and then I'm able to slide it off of the paper just like so. I'm going to apply it in this midsection right there. Now that all that's done, I'm going to put another clear coat on the whole thing, and then I'll get back with you for final assembly. Show you how it came out with the second coat, second clear coat. So what we need to do is we're gonna install, of course, our hinge joints here, but we need to re-drill these holes because as you epoxy, of course, epoxy gets down in there and gums it all up. So we're gonna re-drill those. Let's get some 30-minute epoxy and start installing that. I'm going to install this in two segments here. This first one I'm going to install the one side of the hinges, and then I'll come back and do the other. That way I can get them aligned the way I want. But I'm going to go ahead and put them in this one side and then let it set up before I try to do the other. It'll just be a cleaner install if I do it that way. If I try and do it all at once, I could, but I've found that it's kind of messy doing it that way. This is going to be my opportunity to clean that hinge out. Now that that's set up, before I glue the other side together. Let's dry fit. That all aligns pretty good. So if you have a misalignment, like if it's not lining up very good, if it's like that or whatever, you can take your pliers and kind of bend these tabs up or down, whatever the case may be, to recenter that particular piece. All right, well, let's mix up some more epoxy and finish this thing off. And I'm not going to put a ton of epoxy on there because it'll all come squeezing out and make a mess. I'm going to try and not do that. Okay. Let's take a look at what our final weight came out to be. I've got some hooks and split rings on there as well. Let's see if I can get it all squeezed onto that scale. Looks like 1.8 ounces. If you like the content I'm putting out, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and give me a thumbs up so I can make more of the stuff you want to see. Also, feel free to leave a comment. I welcome your feedback and appreciate all of your support. Thanks again everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.